Mexican War of Independence. In the early hours of September 16th, 1810, in the small town of Dolores, New Spain, a church bell rang, not to call the faithful Christians to pray, but to summon them to rebellion. That bell, rung by a priest named Miguel Hidalgo, marked the beginning of the Mexican War of Independence. It was a moment of revolution born from injustice, shaped by demands for reform, and met with fierce reaction from colonial power. This is the story of how one man's call for change ignited a movement that would transform a nation. Before the revolution, for nearly 300 years, Mexico, then known as New Spain, was ruled by the country Spain. Society was rigidly divided by birth and race. At the top were the Spaniards born in Europe, who controlled government and wealth. Below them were the Creoles, people of Spanish descent born in the Americas, often educated and prosperous, yet denied any political power. Despite their wealth and education, Creoles were systemically excluded from high offices and were instead reserved for Spaniards born in Europe. This exclusion bred resentment and anger among the only class that had the education and resources to actually challenge the Spanish elite. This turned frustration into quiet resistance. At the very bottom were indigenous people, mestizos, and the poor. They were heavily taxed, exploited, and excluded from any opportunity. Many indigenous communities lost their land to large estates, were forced into labor, and paid tribute to survive. These injustices were enforced by colonial officers and justified by institutions that were meant to offer protection, creating an atmosphere and reality of suffering. By the late 1700s, ideas from the Enlightenment and the American and French revolutions spread across the Atlantic like wildfire. Concepts like liberty, equality, and reform arose, and yet Spain responded with not reform, but even tighter and secure control. This deepened the divide between ruler and ruled. The tension between New Spain and Spain was growing. The system was cracking. But revolutions do not begin in palaces or castles. They begin in crowded villages, in empty stomachs, and in spite and anger. In the town of Dolores, that anger found a voice, not a Spaniard or a noble, but in a parish priest. Miguel Hidalgo had seen the suffering up close and watched as the system crushed those it claimed to protect and serve. Miguel Hidalgo did not look like a revolutionary. Born in 1753 on a ranch in San Vicente, he was a Catholic priest, a scholar, and a teacher. But Hidalgo was a reformer at heart. Unlike many priests at the time, he lived amongst the people. He learned the languages of indigenous people. He encouraged local industry, taught farmers new techniques, and questioned social inequality. He read banned books and discussed dangerous ideas such as freedom, justice, and self rule. Hidalgo believed that reform was not only possible, but necessary. When peaceful change proved impossible under Spanish rule, reform eventually gave way to revolution. Revolution, the Grito de Dolores. In 1810, conspirators planned an uprising against Spanish authority. When the plot was discovered, Hidalgo made a fateful decision, one that would change Mexico forever. In the early morning of September 16th, he rang the church bell and delivered a speech, remembered as the Grito de Dolores. Though the exact words are lost, the message he gave was clear. Rise up, resist oppression, and defend your rights. Peasants, laborers, indigenous villagers, armed with farm tools and pure and raw anger, answered his call. What began as an idea became a mass movement. This was revolution in its purest form, emotional, spontaneous, and unstoppable. Within weeks, Hidalgo led an army of tens of thousands towards Mexico City through chaos. Hidalgo's movement was revolutionary, but it was uncontrolled and unpredictable. As rebel forces advanced, violence erupted. Spanish properties were destroyed and civilians were killed. For many followers, the fight was not only against colonial rule, but against centuries of suffering. Hidalgo saw reform, the end of slavery, reduced taxes, and equality amongst all of the races. He abolished slavery in territories he controlled, an unfathomable act for the time. But the revolution began to move faster than the leadership. Hidalgo initially hesitated to take Mexico City, a decision that allowed Spanish forces to regroup. His dream, their dream, was slipping into chaos and becoming distant. The power strikes back. Spain responded with a brutal and deadly reaction. The colonial government labeled Hidalgo a traitor and heretic. Armies were immobilized. Villagers who were suspected of supporting the rebellion were punished. What began as a call for justice was met with executions, censorship, and fear. Reform had been ignored. Royalist armies, better trained, disciplined, and better equipped, made quick work of the rebel forces, crushing them. Hidalgo was captured in 1811, stripped of his priesthood, and was executed by firing squad. His head was displayed publicly, a warning to all who dared to challenge the Spanish Empire. It seemed like the revolution had failed, but ideas cannot be executed. Even as rebellion spread, the Spanish crown continued to issue royal decrees, reorganizing churches, appointing officials, and asserting control from thousands of miles away. Many documents reveal a government focused on authority and control rather than equality and justice. While Spain reinforced institutions, the people demanded for transformation. The revolution lives on. Hidalgo's rebellion would ultimately fail, and he would pay for this with his life. But ideas once unleashed cannot be executed. His call shattered the myth of Spanish invincibility. As a result, the movement he sparked survived. Other leaders rose up. Jose Maria Morelos, Vicente Guerrero, and others carried the struggle and fight forward. Over the next decade, revolution and reaction continued to clash. Spain attempted limited reform, but it was too late. The demand for independence could not be silenced. In 1821, Mexico finally achieved independence. Hidalgo never lived to see it, but he became its symbol. Revolution, reform, reaction. The Mexican War of Independence was not a single moment, but a cycle. Revolution erupted when injustice became unbearable. Reform was demanded by those who sought a fairer society. Reaction answered with force, trying to preserve the old order. Miguel Hidalgo stood at the center of that cycle, a man who believed change was possible.